I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast, and today we take on a few questions, including, will Arthur Smith misuse the Steelers' offensive personnel like many accused him of misusing Atlanta Falcons personnel? We'll talk about that more. And by the way, hey, y'all, we got some new theme music. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, so first and foremost, want to get into the new theme music that we have for the show. It's called How Can I Lose by Johnny Quest, the Rebel of Renaissance Music Records. I believe it is still unreleased. It's supposed to come out soon, but it's a shout out to my guy Cedric Perry, who's the president, the CEO, and founder of Renaissance Music Records. He was actually the artist of the first song that we used, Soul Kick. The guy who's owned the record label. Cedric and I go back to our Cheney days, way back to our Cheney days at our college, the first HBCU. So I'm always going to show him and his team of artists some love out there. Go show them some love, by the way, by checking out Renaissance Music Records and Johnny Quest the Rebel and Keystorm. They've got a lot of great stuff there. But let's get into our Steelers talk here, and it's a talking point that's been on the mind of many people when talking about what this offense is going to look like, thinking about the transition from Matt Canada to Arthur Smith, and what is Arthur Smith going to be able to do? And there's a lot of people excited about Arthur Smith, and reasonably so. You look at what he did with the Titans, there's a lot of excitement there. But it's also reasonable to look at what didn't happen with the Falcons in the 3 years that he spent there and how things never really worked out. And so some of the accusations about Arthur Smith is that he didn't use the personnel well in Atlanta, and whether that will carry over to the Pittsburgh Steelers. For example, we have one person who asked us about this, Johnny, who called into the Locked On Steelers hotline. By the way, you can always get on the Locked On Steelers hotline by calling 412-223-6644. Leave your name, your question, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute, and we'll get to where there. But here's Connor, excuse me, not Johnny. Johnny's going to have another question, but here's Connor asking this question from Indiana.
Hi, this is Connor from Indiana. So I just had a question. So with Arthur Smith, the only complaint I've ever heard about him is that he didn't use his key players, especially in Atlanta. He liked to use Johnny Smith rather than Kyle Pitts, and used Tyler Algier rather than Bijan Robinson. Do you think that's going to be an issue? And if it is an issue, who do you think is going to get the most uses? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Connor. And it's a legitimate question because that was one of the criticisms there. And again, if Bijan Robinson, was drafted at extremely high, they wanted him to come in and be a difference maker, and he was. He still got plenty of touches, but some people were wondering, why was there more of a split there? Some people thought he was being misused at different times of the year. If you want to go back and read through a lot of those, just Google Arthur Smith, Bijan Robinson, and you will find a ton of articles from in the season that were people asking about it to kind of give you insights on where a lot of people were questioning what was going on in Atlanta at the time. And then those questions kind of got expanded into being about the usage of all of his players from every one of his years. And I think that's where it might get a little too drawn out. I think that's where it's like, okay, let's bring it back a bit. Now, again, Johnny Smith versus Kyle Pitts, another highly drafted offensive player, in Kyle Pitts not there. Now, I will say this: Kyle Pitts did have a lot of injuries that have kind of gotten in the way of this thing, and I also think that there's a lot of things that didn't work out in Atlanta that weren't always Arthur Smith's fault. I think that there were some offensive usage problems at times, but let's get through piece by piece here. Because not everything was all on Arthur Smith. Yes, the offense didn't work in Atlanta, especially last year. They were 26th in points, 17th in yards gained. and some of it was on Arthur Smith, I think, for not being able to get certain things to work. But I also think that there's a recognition of like where the Falcons were supposed to be, because when he inherited the team, he was supposed to get Matt Ryan for the long haul. He was getting paid big money, and then the team let go of Matt Ryan, and he was told, well, don't build it around Matt Ryan. He's like, well, wait a second, that's what we were trying to put together in the first place. So he had to flip all this around. And I think that led to a lot of extra challenges that maybe Arthur Smith didn't handle as well. And that led to, I think, overall, just trying to manage an entire team. He lost out on what he was supposed to be focusing on, which was making the offense an elite offense so that could lead the Falcons and be the catalyst of making the Falcons a really good team. And so I'm not making excuses there. I'm saying these are the things that I think set the table that he just did not execute in. But here's where I think that it could be prevented from carrying over to the Steelers, because I think that's the crux of your question here, Connor. Because I can't disagree with the usage thing. Now I will say Bijan Robinson also did get the ball a lot for the Falcons. He had the 12th most touches in the NFL with 272, just ahead of Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams, Kyren Williams, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, Jahmyr Gibbs, Raheem Mostert, like a lot of guys. He got more touches than last year. In fact, he got only 7 less touches than Najee Harris. I think part of it was, maybe Arthur Smith wanted to split some touches between Bijan Robinson and Algier, but and maybe part of it's also trying to expand Bijan Robinson's career and not run him into the ground or run him into the wheels fall off, if people want to go back to an old Mike Tomlinism there. But again, it doesn't clear him from not making the offense work in Atlanta. But we have seen plenty of coaches be really good coordinators, like Arthur Smith was in his 2 years in Tennessee, and then be really bad head coaches, or just bad head coaches, just not work out, and then go back to being a coordinator and it working. And I don't see a reason why Arthur Smith couldn't do that. I think that wouldn't do that. I think there's definitely reasons why it couldn't happen, but I don't think it's a definite. I don't think it's a silly question to think that it could happen. I think that there's a lot of things there that you could say could work in his favor, but also could not. But you think back over the years about coaches that did that. Dick LeBeau was that for the Steelers. He was a defensive coordinator, left to be a head coach for the Bengals, was terrible there, came back to be a defensive coordinator, and was one of the greatest defensive coordinators in the history of the NFL for the Steelers. Look at Spagnuolo and what he's been able to do for the Chiefs. He was once given a shot and it didn't work out, and then he became that. Look at what Todd Haley did for the Steelers as an offensive coordinator after his time in Kansas City failed out. So I think that there's plenty of chances for guys who didn't work out as head coaches for one reason or another to work out as coordinators. But my thinking here on whether or not some of the usage problems the Falcons will work their way to the Steelers. I look at some of the usage things that happened in Tennessee, and you didn't see any of that problem there when it was Arthur Smith's offense with Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry's best years are under Arthur Smith's offense. He revived Ryan Tannehill's career. I wouldn't even say revived. He was the best years of Ryan Tannehill's career and got things going. And also, I think with the Steelers, he's going to have something that he didn't have in Atlanta. And I think that's a plan that might be able to be stuck with over time. For example, he's gonna have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. We'll see how that plays out, and that's the one thing that might change really quickly because of their contract situations. And we'll get to that in the third segment, because there's a really good question that we got from that on the Locked On Steelers hotline. But I think that one thing that he can consistently count on if he sticks around in Pittsburgh for a few years, it's going to be this offensive line they're building right now. Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Isaac Seumalo. We know Daniels is probably gone after this year, but there's a core there that if he builds it right and those guys develop in the right way, that could be a really big asset for him moving forward. The running backs that the Steelers have right now. Sure, Najee Harris didn't get his 5th-year extension, but you got Jaylen Warren right behind him, ready to go. And I think that there's still a chance that maybe they could keep Najee Harris. If they don't, Jaylen Warren becomes the one, and they get another guy, or they get another guy who becomes the one over Jaylen Warren. But I think that that's a system there. Wide receiver wise, you got George Pickens. You have a chance to sign him long term if things work out this year. Tight end wise, you got Pat Freiermuth. Yes, his contract isn't set beyond next season or this season actually, but I think that he's a guy that's going to get an extension. You got Darnell Washington for a few years. You got Connor Hayward for a few years. There is, and under where Arthur Smith's at, he has Mike Tomlin, and Mike Tomlin ain't going nowhere unless the Steelers completely fall out of orbit. And in his 16 years of doing it, they have not. So I think Arthur Smith may have the most important thing that he needs to make sure that his problems from Atlanta don't carry over with the Steelers, and that's stability. And I think that that's something that he's going to get a chance organizationally. Now, stability on offense, he's going to have to build that. But I think he'll have a supporting cast. I think he'll have the support of Omar Khan and what's been a pretty productive front office in its first year and a half of working. I think that's the biggest asset Arthur Smith can rely upon, and why I think he'll be able to make things work in Pittsburgh a lot better than they worked before he got in Pittsburgh, and also a lot better than they worked for him in Atlanta. So to answer your question, Connor, those are the reasons why I think that those things won't carry over. And one of the most stable units I think he'll have, at least for this season, are the running backs. And we got a question on the running back situation. We'll get to that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the app you can download right to your phone. You can also go to the website gametime.co to buy tickets to all your favorite events without it being a stressful effort, because GameTime is where you can book tickets to your favorite sporting events and so much more. And it's summer, and that means baseball season, so go get your MLB tickets to see your favorite ball club play out there. And then especially the next time you want to do so, go on GameTime and you'll see amazing prices on the app. Whether you're in Pittsburgh and you want to see rookie phenom Paul Skeens pitch on the mound for the Pirates, or say you're in Los Angeles and you want to see Shohei Ohtani be a world sensation for the Dodgers, you can do that. And every time you want to go into those games, check GameTime, because you're often going to get the best price out there with GameTime. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets to all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They give you killer deals even on last-minute tickets, where they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, and you can save up to 60% off of buying tickets even up to the last minute. Plus, the best price guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here, going over some of your questions, and I wanted to revolve things a little bit around the offense, because I thought there's always good questions on both sides of the ball, but I thought some of these paired really well together. And so I teased before, we had a caller named Johnny who asked a really good question. I mistakenly gave Johnny Connor's question, but Connor asked the first one. Here's Johnny asking about the running back situation.
This Johnny Knight. I've been a fan for about 44 years now. Anyway, I was wondering, what do you think about the Pittsburgh Steelers running with two running backs out the backfield, and Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris at the same time on some plays? Do you think that might be able to, confuse the defenses on other teams? Let me know what you think, please. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Johnny, and I think it's a reasonable question that anyone can call in, by the way, 412-223-6644. But let's talk about this, because I do think both running backs will be on the field at times for the Steelers. And I've talked briefly about this on other shows, but let's hammer this a little bit home a little bit more. I think some packages will include Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, and that could be phenomenal. Both can be dynamic players in their own ways, and they can also force personnel packages to have to honor different things. Both can throw big blocks. We've seen them both sit down people when they've had to block them. Both can also run really hard and break tackles. Jaylen Warren has the home run speed that we've definitely seen. Go back and watch his touchdown against the Browns this year to see that. And Najee Harris has the ideal size and strength. You want to grind out games consistently, throughout games to wear defenses down. And we've seen him do that over the years. In fact, we've also seen him do it to the Browns defense. But take one of them out, And then you have to ask, okay, what's next after an injury? The answer for that actually might be the best that it's been since the both of them have been on the team, and that's Cordo Patterson now, because he's the guy that they brought in for kick returns. And make no mistake, I think that he's going to be involved as a guy who lines up in the backfield and takes a few handoffs. He's not going to be exclusively a running back, but I think that with Cordo Patterson's background, he's been used as a running back. I think Arthur Smith's going to try to work him in a little bit. In fact, Arthur Smith has used him that way at times. And that's something where I think that he could come in and give either or Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren breathers. I think that's the other aspect of this, is making sure that Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are fresh. As the Steelers want to grind teams out, they want to run the ball. We're talking about how physical they want to be, how dominant they want to be at the line of scrimmage, but also how much they want to run the ball and balance their things out. You also want to balance out how you're using your running backs so that you're not wearing them down throughout the season, that they're still fresh when, say, ideally you make the playoffs and you want to still be that same strong running football team. And in fact, Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com brought that up on yesterday's episode when we were talking about this. And he was saying, like, hey, one of the ways to win playoff games is by running the ball well and dominating there and doing that could be something. If the Steelers do it all year long and they have the personnel to do it in the playoffs, that could be the factor that helps them get a playoff win and be a dangerous team in the playoffs. And there's other things that have to happen as well, but that can be a big catalyst for making things happen there. But again, the other aspect here is not just the running part of the running back, it's also the receiving part of it and how they work in the passing game. Last year, the two combined, for I think it was 1,859 yards. I may be mixing that up, but the two combined as far as yards from scrimmage. 2,354 yards. I knew I missed the number there. It was 2,359 yards total yards from scrimmage, and that's a lot of yards from scrimmage for your two top running backs when it comes to uses there. And in fact, that made for three players the Steelers had with yards from scrimmage, with Najee Harris at over 1,200, George Pickens at over 1,100, and also Jaylen Warren just 4 yards off of George Pickens. But I think that they can certainly do more in that department. And that's a really interesting part of where I think this offense can go, is that they're not just rushing yards. Now, again, rushing yards are a big part of that. Over 1,800 of those all-purpose yards were on the ground. So even in a bad system, that's what they were able to do without an offensive identity. Again, go back to November of last year when we went in the Steelers locker room and we asked, what's the identity of this offense? And players across the board were like, I don't know. We're going in April and OTAs and rookie camp, and there's PowerPoint presentations that we're told about from Troy Fautanu that the team is learning and there's a team message, and this will be the identity, and Arthur Smith's not playing around. They're setting this message from the door. I think that could really help these two be at their best in a way that we haven't even seen yet. I think that there's a lot of people who love Jaylen Warren because he's that undrafted guy that runs so hard, and he does a lot of really good things here. But the crazy part is, what if we still haven't seen the best of Jaylen Warren, just like I think we haven't seen the best in Najee Harris? That's where I think that these two could be really dangerous. Put them in an offense like how Arthur Smith's offense in Tennessee worked, that, when Henry was there, they could, he was extremely dominant, and those were his best years. Imagine if you could do that with two running backs to balance the offense out. And again, do it in different ways, because they do different things, where Jaylen Warren's quicker and faster in open space, and he can turn, one crack into a touchdown. Najee Harris is the guy where maybe Jaylen Warren can't do this as much, but he's the guy that can wear you down and hit you, 5-6 times a drive, and then keep pushing you and wear you down. And then as soon as he might get tired, you throw Jaylen Warren in there, and now you got to deal with this fast guy that can also run you over, because Jaylen Warren's not just some dude that you just take down with an arm tackle. So I think there's a lot of excitement around the idea of these two players being on the field. So it's a very good question, Johnny. And I think that there's going to be some questions too about how to use both of these guys. And there's a good chance that they could not only be guys that combine to go over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, because they already did that last year, but they could be guys that go over 2,000 combined yards in just rushing yards. And again, they were close to doing that last year. They had over 1,800 rushing yards combined. So I look at this and I think, yeah, they could be on the field at the same time. And again, the running game is only a part of it. I talked to Eddie Faulkner about this, the Steelers running backs coach, and he was like, I asked him like, hey, have Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, improved and to be more important in the passing game? And he's like, improved? They're ready for it. And I think his point was, we got to get them the ball. And I think that that's going to be really interesting. If you remember his response to that when I asked him about it, he seemed like, oh, no, they've been ready. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Arthur Smith incorporates them into the offense. And that's also when it could be really interesting to see both of them on the field at the same time, because both of them can operate as receivers and as pass protectors for Russell Wilson. I think that's a big part of this that shouldn't be overlooked, is because you can, let's say you can line up in a formation where, let's say George Pickens lines up out wide. You have a Calvin Austin, you have a Pat Freiermuth, and then you have both the running backs lining up in the shotgun with Russell Wilson. And at one, on any given play, Jaylen Warren can stay back and pass protect while Najee goes out for a route. Najee Harris can go out for a route while Jaylen Warren stays in pass protection, or both get sent out for passes, and you try to find different matchups. And again, there are different styles of how they play could also make it tougher for defense. It forces defenses to have to be more detailed in who they assign to cover which player, because a player who might be big enough to bring down Najee Harris might not be quick enough to stick with to Jaylen Warren in open space, and vice versa. A player who might be quick enough to stick with Jaylen Warren might not be big enough to stick Najee Harris. So I think that's where things could get really interesting for Arthur Smith's offense, both in the run and the pass games, to force those mismatches. And I think that could also be something that leads to some easier big plays that come from Russell Wilson just making smart checkdowns. That was a huge part of the killer bees offense. I know that a lot of people remember, Le'Veon Bell running through great holes and stuff like that, and Antonio Brown making insane catches, and Ben Roethlisberger launching bombs down the field to Martavis Bryant. But a big part of the offense was just the possibility of, when teams covered Antonio Brown running an amazing corner route and Martavis Bryant running it deep, and everything else is covered, Le'Veon Bell, who was also a really good pass protector, could just run up about 3-4 yards, turn around, Ben Roethlisberger would hit him, and he would go get like 6 to 8 yards, and that'd be a nice way to just, we took the check down, but that's what the yards will get there. If they operate like that with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, but even more creatively, and also with two of them being able to keep defenses on their toes, I think there are a lot of different possibilities there, and do that. And again, I think that there's a lot of different things that can lead to matchups issues there. And if that happens, if Arthur Smith gets that going, watch out. I think that could make Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris even more dangerous than they already have been for the Steelers. And again, remember, Cordo Patterson could fit into that process too, because of his experience in the NFL and experience with Arthur Smith. But we've got an Omar Khan question. I want to get to Omar Khan's question next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today. I wanted to get back into the question. This one comes from our friend Paco out in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Again, Steelers fans are all over the place. We got Indiana, we got Virginia, we had a question from Pittsburgh. But let's get to Paco's question, because it involves Omar Khan and roster construction, which is always interesting. Take it away, Paco.
Hey, Chris, this is Paco Martinez from Fredericksburg, Texas. And I'm just wondering, I'm a big Steelers fan, and are we opening up a window that is going to close extra fast? We have a lot of friendly deals, a lot of one-year friendly deals that obviously we're not going to have next year, like Russell Wilson, Patrick Queen, and some other really good deals that we got with for this year. Are we opening up a just 1 year window? Do you think next year we're going to be able to re-sign some of those guys like Patrick Queen and them? Thanks.
So thank you, Paco, for your question. I want to point out before we get into it, I know there's a lot of people listening right now like, they're ready to yell at Paco. Patrick Queen is not on a 1 year deal. He's on a 3 year deal, and that's and it's a substantial 3-year deal. He is part of the long term. But to Paco's point, Russell Wilson's on a 1-year deal. Dante Jackson's around for 1 year. Cameron Sutton's around for 1 year. Cam Hayward's up after this year. Pat Freiermuth's up after this year. Najee Harris is up after this year. There are a lot of guys who can be free agents next year if the Steelers don't make moves to re-sign some of these guys. And there's a legitimate question there. But I also think that the Russell Wilson question is very unique because, yes, he did sign a team-friendly and a very unique deal because of that situation with the Broncos and how they still owe him a lot of money, and he's getting that money no matter what, so he can sign a vet minimum contract while still getting paid big dollars there. And I do think it's at least a question for next year. It'll be a big question because it also heavily depends upon what does Russell Wilson do for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I don't think it's a 1-year window, but maybe it is for Russell Wilson. So let's examine the different ways that it could go for Russell Wilson and how Omar Khan would have to react to it. He could end up having a really big year for the Steelers and demanding a hefty contract that the Steelers don't want to pay. So if that happens, well, the Steelers are like, look, we got a nucleus of guys. We're not giving up, key guys that could be around for the next 5 to 6 years for a guy who's probably going to be around for 1 to 2 to 3, maybe 3 years if you're lucky. So if that happens, I think that's where Justin Fields comes in because he's another guy who also, by the way, his deal runs out at the end of the season, but he would be inexpensive to re-sign, presumably, because he would have been on the bench for most of the year. And again, this is if Russell Wilson plays really well. If he plays really well, you're not going to see Justin Fields. He's going to be a backup for the Steelers, and then it's going to be, hey, can you sign Justin Fields to an extension where you get to maybe like how the Packers looked at Jordan Love and they said, hey, we need to see it from you before we pay you big money, and you get to see him there. I think that's the backup plan for that. But let's also go through the possibility of what if he comes off of a good year. And Russell Wilson, in interviews before he signed with the Steelers, he said he wanted to go somewhere where he could win 2 more Super Bowl rings. And if, let's say, he has a really good year for the Steelers that puts him on the, says that he could go hit the market and make big money. If he's having a good year with the Steelers, and let's say that, that good year makes them serious contenders, because again, the Steelers defense has been nothing to sneeze at over the past few years and really past while. With the Steelers' improvements in the run game, I think it's very reasonable to look at Russell Wilson and say, hey, Russ, maybe you should keep doing friendly deals with the Steelers because this is the best chance that you're going to have to win a Super Bowl. Because if someone pays you big bucks, there's no guarantee it's going to be as good as what the Steelers did there. And again, that's if Russell Wilson does play really well. But let's examine the other side of it. Let's say that Russell Wilson doesn't play really well. And this is, and that's part of the question that you have to reevaluate there. I feel like you're like, oh, well, you spent $1.2 million on the guy. So what? And you get to try again. And oh, by the way, there's also still Justin Fields, who if Russell Wilson doesn't play well this year, Justin Fields goes on, you move on past Williams. If Justin Fields don't work out, then you explore that when you get there. But we're talking about windows here. We still don't know what this offense will look like with these guys. But to answer your question about are they opening up just a 1-year window, I don't think so. And again, there's other guys in this that have to be calculated too. Dante Jackson, Cameron Sutton, Cam Hayward, James Daniels, who we've talked about is most likely to almost definitely gone. Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, they're all going to be free agents after this season if nothing's done. And that is a question the Steelers have to get there. But the Steelers, they're currently estimated to have about $77 million in cap space for the 2025 season. And that's without a TJ Watt extension, which could be coming next year because his contract's up shortly after that. Any cap adjustments with, higher caps, salary caps in the NFL because of revenue sharing and increased, all the NFL continuing to make more money, any restructures or any cuts, because there's guys like Larry Ogunjobi that, are going to be earning $10 million at that point, and maybe Larry Ogunjobi isn't worth $10 million at that point, and other things that they could do. But I think right now their camp situation is fine, and I in fact think that part of what Omar Khan's been doing in not giving Najee Harris a 5th-year extension, even though I think they should have, I think part of what the strategy has been is they want as much flexibility going into next season as possible while keeping together the main parts of the core that they can keep together without endangering them in that process. So I think that, again, if things go badly this season, they probably get more aggressive with the change. They're like, all right, well, Russell Wilson didn't work out. Justin Fields, let's change some more things up here. And maybe they do say goodbye to Cam Hayward if things don't work out there. Again, I don't think they will. I think that they get a deal done with him. But I'm saying if all these things on Steelers fans wouldn't like side of the aisle, if all things over there happen, I think that there's a contingency plan for that. And that's, again, part of the wiggle room that Omar Khan has left them in salary cap space. But if all things go right for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think that they're in a position where they can keep a bulk of the younger guys that they see as being part of the core. And maybe not even younger guys, maybe some of the older guys as well, but keeping a bulk of the people that make up the core that is the team that, if they are really good this year, they can keep them around. I think that's part of the plan here. And so, again, Paco, I do think that you're kind of on it with Russell Wilson, that like, hey, this might be a short-lived thing. But that was kind of the whole point anyways, is that it's a short-lived thing. Think of it this way. When the Denver Broncos took their shot at Russell Wilson, they committed tens of millions of dollars for multiple seasons to him. So much so that they're paying him $30 million against the cap this year. The Broncos might be one of the worst teams in the NFL this upcoming season because it didn't work out with Russell Wilson. If Russell Wilson doesn't work out with the Steelers, the impact is just on the games that he played while he's a Pittsburgh Steeler. It will have no impact in the years after that because they're not paying him anything else. So if anything, I think it puts the Steelers in a position where, hey, it's little risk, potential at a high reward. And I think that's a fine position for the Steelers to be in when you're just experimenting with a veteran quarterback that you're not sure if he can put it together for your team right now. And if he does, great. If not, you have some contingency plans there. One, by the way, is another quarterback looking to redeem himself, and that's Justin Fields there. So, and again, if they are good, then guess what? You re-sign you guys that you can, and you keep building through the draft. You get guys that can contribute at a young age because you're drafting well. And again, I think these last 2 years, as much as people want to talk about Kevin Colbert's draft classes and the ones they didn't like, these first 2 seasons, a lot of people seem to like what Omar Khan's putting together. Would you like to see, if guys like Patrick Queen and Russell Wilson and the guys they brought in work out, and this is a team that maybe wins a playoff game, maybe is a real contender and wins more than just 9 to 10 games, and if, again, let's say the Steelers go out and do those things that you want to see them do, and they're able to keep a bulk of those guys, then you're drafting and adding to that team and still adding the younger players, and you got a nucleus that's forming and could be there longer. So I don't think necessarily, no, this isn't just a team that can be around, that can be good for 1 year and then quickly fall off. And I don't think that sharp fall is coming this year. I'm not sure the Steelers are going to be a team that is a serious AFC contender. This is a tough schedule they've got, and this is a tough division that they're in. And even though they've played this tough division very well over the past several years, I think there's still a lot of questions that we don't know, and these are the questions that we're going to keep asking and exploring here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because that's part of the fun of covering this Steelers team right now. So, reasonable questions to ask from all you. Thank to everyone who called into the Locked On Steelers call-in line. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.